Hi there, and welcome to the BrightWord Books Podcast, where we explore groundbreaking ideas with today's leading thinkers. I'm Chris Dabbs, and today we have a fascinating guest. Let's tune in. Welcome back to the show. Today I'm joined by Brian Oglesby, a retired lieutenant colonel from East St. Louis, Illinois. I hope I said that one correct, being a
St.
Brit.
Louis.
St. Louis, you see. Us Brits, we just say the wrong thing all the time.
Oh.
Okay, so hold on. Let's try that again. Okay, today I'm joined by Brian Oglesby, a retired lieutenant colonel from East St. Louis, Illinois, who served an impressive 35 years in the Army Reserves, including 6 tours on active duty. Amazing. Brian, you hold degrees in business administration and genetics and cellular biology. And you've been recognized by, now, how would you say this in America? The Marquis or Marquis, who's who for his professional achievements in laboratory medicine, research, and beyond. So, yeah, is that Marquis or Marquis over in America?
You know what people use? Usually they say Marquis, usually, but they use both pronunciations. For Marquis, yeah.
Okay, well, great. Well, hopefully, yeah, well, I got it right one way or another for some people,
Mhm.
maybe not for others, but
Yeah.
you can't have everything. Okay.
Yeah.
But we're here today to talk about your book,
Mhm.
Progressives, Leftists, and Black America, and how the leftist progressive policies and causes have been bad for Black America. I mean, your book offers a bold critique of progressive politics and its long-term effects on Black communities. Now, clearly, this isn't something that I, know anything about whatsoever. So it's going to be fantastic talking to you and getting to the nub of what, your book is about, really. So, today we're going to be digging into some deeper and different angles around that central theme.
The topic, nobody's really wrote a book or nobody's really investigated or researched it. That specific thing, how those topics have been bad for the Black community. No, I can't find any articles where anybody really has. And so just from my experience and from my research, I can only give you the best critique of what I thought happened. That were really bad and that were moderate. And some things turned out good. But a lot there were a lot of cons too. It had its pros and cons.
I can see a PhD coming, Brian.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah, it had its pros and cons. One of the things that happened with the movement was there were some things that went. The feminist movement was one thing that happened, and then integration. And there was just one group of progressives that were interested in integration. The rest of them really weren't. They really didn't want Black or whites to integrate it. They wanted everything to stay separate. And then other things happened, like Black leadership played a role in it, and things they did and did not do. But I think one thing that happened there was a pivotal moment in society. There was a debate between two icons in leadership in the Black community. One of them was W.E.B. Du Bois, and one of them was Booker T. Washington. And you see, these men came from two different backgrounds. Booker T. Washington was born a slave on a plantation in Virginia. People that had very conservative values, and some of them were very racist against Black people. That there's some very indifferent values about Black people. And Booker T. Washington, he goes and he establishes the Tuskegee Institute. He does this in Alabama in the late 1800s when he couldn't depend on any of the whites to help him out because there was so much racism in Alabama in the early 1800s. And I mean that the hatred and the lynchings against Black people was terrible in the late 1800s. Back then it was. And so he found, in the middle of all that, he founds Tuskegee Institute. And Tuskegee Institute, it helps train a workforce of Black people with skills so they can go out and be productive in society. Right. He's a Black man. He's trying to do this for Black people. But he also starts a business organization in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he goes to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he founds the Negro Business League. And this was, I'm not exactly sure what year it is, but it's sometime around 1900, a little bit before that. And it organizes the black business community to get together and to have businesses, and their money exchanges hands in the black community, sometimes 36 to 100 times before it left the community. So they really had a community, a business community. He got the business people together and they generated wealth, and they did something that was really productive for society. And that little part of Oklahoma, the town, it was called Little Africa. It's what the people named it. But it was called the Greenwood District of Tulsa, Oklahoma,
Right.
until some angry mobs of Klansmen burnt
Yeah.
it to the ground in
Mhm.
2021, in 1921.
I remember that.
Yeah,
I was going to
yeah,
ask you about this.
hmm
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Oh, okay, right. So that was there.
And this happened during the progressive movement in the United States. So in about a year, they build it back up. It takes like a year or two, and they build it back. And I don't think all the institutions ever really recovered from that. And but interestingly enough, let me go to W.E.B. Du Bois. He's the other man. He was from Massachusetts, and he was one of the originals in the Niagara movement, because the story was in Buffalo, New York. They wanted to get a hotel to rent in Buffalo. They wanted to do it in a hotel, have the meeting at a hotel in Buffalo, New York. But the hotel didn't allow Negroes. Black people weren't even allowed in the hotel in Buffalo, New York. And so they went to Canada. And so that was where they started the Niagara movement at. And so he goes, him and W.E.B. Du Bois, him and Booker T. Washington, they have a debate because they're two icons of leadership. He's doing a lot of his work in Massachusetts and New York up north, about around a lot of progressive whites up there. And what he wanted was, the debate was about, his argument in the debate, W.B. Du Bois is that black people should integrate with whites. They should integrate in society and become a part of society,
Sure.
and become a part and participate in every avenue in society. And that was a good thing. That was a noble thing for black people to try and do. But W. Booker T. Washington, he had a different strategy. He said black people shouldn't try and integrate with whites. They
Right.
should cast their buckets down where they are, and they should make strong black communities of their own. But if you have in that way, they created a big business community, and it gave the black community some advantages. They had some advantages that they don't have now.
Right.
Because what happened was, when integration happened, and I'm not saying integration was a bad thing, there were some positives to it, but let's just say in the book I titled it Rethinking Integration. So I'm just saying, let's rethink it. With integration, what happened was blacks, and all this happened, the integration, it slowly started to happen right after the debate in 1900. But the big push for integration was when Martin Luther King comes.
Mm.
And he goes right to the president, Lyndon B. Johnson, and he has the Civil Rights Act bill of 1964 and 67 and 68 signed. And so that gives black people more freedom to go and do what they want to be and be wherever they want to in society. So all the Jim Crow laws that the South had, and the sundown towns,
Mm.
and Illinois and Missouri were famous for those sundown towns.
Oh, wow.
But it wasn't just Illinois and Missouri. It was all over the Midwest, the North, and the West too. Oregon had them too. Oregon and Washington and Idaho, some of those, they had plenty of sundown towns.
Brian, I think it's important for you to explain what a sundown town is for people
Oh,
who are listening who don't actually
oh,
know.
okay.
I think I know, but go
A
on.
sundown town was a town that did not allow black people to be in town, or if you were in town, to be outdoors between 6 in the evening and 6 at night. You weren't even allowed in the town. In some of those towns, in some of them, you could be there, but you had to be indoors.
Right.
And you see, when I was a little boy in the 1970s, we used to drive from East St. Louis, Illinois to Mounds, Illinois. And we had to get there after a certain time. We couldn't get there too early because some of the towns may have been sundown towns. And if the police had caught us there, they could have told us to leave and don't come back. And this was in the 1970s.
Yeah.
And the Jim Crow, my grandparents went through Jim Crow in the South, and it was terrible. Black people that didn't abide with it, some of them got hung. And it was terrible. But anyway, back to the
Thank you
subject.
for that.
Yeah, back to the subject. They have the debate. Debate ends. W.E.B. Du Bois wins the debate. And so that gives incentive for them to integrate black people into society. Because if some echelon of black leadership agrees with it, then it must be okay for us to do it. And so black people start to integrate in the 1950s and the 1960s. When integration starts, a lot of your conservative whites and your classical liberals too, when they see black people moving into their neighborhoods, in about 10 years, they had sold everything and left. And they took their businesses with them too. From the main streets, they took everything and went to the suburbs. So these places didn't have anything. There was no big, and so black people had to establish the businesses there. They didn't establish enough businesses there because all the educated black people with the advanced degrees, the PhD degrees, master's degrees, and black people with businesses that could put people to work, and black people that just had trades. Like if you're going to have a farmer's market and you're going to have meat there, then you might want to have a butcher. See, that's something you don't need a college degree for, but you can really help make a community functional. If you're an electrician, you're a bricklayer, you're a carpenter, and you can make those black people, they moved out to integrate with whites. So you had these pockets in the community where there was nothing because whites didn't go back in those parts of the community with their businesses to employ anybody. And a lot of blacks ran to the suburbs because they want to integrate and be a part of society,
Yeah, I
like
see.
all
Right.
the other ones did. And see, and there was a woman. Her name was what was her name? Danielle Romero. She did a podcast on how certain groups that came to the country became white because everybody wasn't really accepted as white at one time. And she used the Southern Europeans, especially like Greek and Italian, and some of the Eastern Europeans weren't always accepted, but she used Irish.
Yeah.
White
Very true.
Irish, they weren't always accepted. They were treated terrible sometimes in the United States. And she says it's because they were Catholic. And so she said it meant that they had a loyalty to the Vatican. So their loyalty to the United States was suspect because the United States was founded by Anglo-Saxon white Protestants. And England was the mother country of the United States. And they treated Ireland terrible sometimes. And so that was the problem the Irish had. And so black people but actually Irish, they became acceptable. They became white. Greeks and Italians did, but blacks never really did. Not like all those other groups. And we never established a community with business. I remember I was in Chicago. I used to go to Chicago every summer, or most summers, not every summer, but a lot of summers. And I was at a conference in Schaumburg, Illinois. It was a suburb of it. And I said, I want to go back to the lakefront and Navy Pier and some of those places that were fun to go to. We went to Chicago, the Loop, downtown, all those shops on Michigan Avenue. And on the way there, I went to one of the Hispanic community, the Mexican community. It was called the Little Village Community. And I could see what, maybe for about a mile, I don't know, maybe a mile or two, I was driving down the street in their community and I saw their ethnic restaurants and their ethnic shops, the bodega, the grocery stores. I saw maybe one might have been a Western Union where you can email money back to someone else. I saw maybe a hardware store, maybe a car lot, maybe banks and savings and loans, discount chains that you could buy clothes, and all the names of the owners. They were Spanish names, Mexican, and they were you could see these bright colored murals on some of the buildings, and they really looked like something out of Mexico City. And you turn your window down and you hear the mariachi music,
Right.
and so you know see, Mexicans did that. They built communities like that. And those communities are really good for a group of people because with those communities, they provide jobs and opportunity for a group of people. They provide goods and services that they might not otherwise have. That's what the Puerto Ricans did in New York with the bodega. And the Mexicans, the Hispanics, they have some advantages that Black people don't have because they integrated, but they kept these little communities with a lot of opportunity for them. And that's good, and it gives you a voice because those communities produce a tax base, and they really produce jobs and opportunity, and it gives the people a say-so in the politics and the interest of that whole city. And see, the Black community, we don't have that. But this group of progressives that founded the NAACP, they supported integration.
Yeah.
And integration was the bad thing. Everything about it was bad because we got a chance to work in some industries that we would not have been able to work in and live in some places that maybe we may not have been able to if the world had been completely segregated, even with those communities. So integration had some advantages to it too. It really did, but it had some disadvantages because we lost those ethnic communities.
Mm.
And this group of progressives that were with the NAACP, they pushed it because I think the reason why they wanted to happen was because they wanted Black people integrated into everything, but never with any ownership or control of anything. So it made you dependent on your employer for everything or somebody else for everything. See, the Hispanics, they have these communities and they can actually produce some things for themselves and produce jobs and opportunity for themselves and have some different positions in politics and everything. And really gives them a head up. And
Mm.
Black people, as a group, we don't really have it like they do. And some of the other groups like Asians and Arab, they're coming to the United States and they're starting businesses. They're starting more businesses than Black people are. As far as acquiring PhD degrees and MD degrees, they're just running circles around Black people. We're not keeping up with them. Another thing that happened with the feminist movement. And with the feminist movement, first when it started, it was the women's liberation movement. And some really good things happened for women during trying to
So
reconnect.
I can still hear you. Don't worry.
Oh, you can still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, some good things happened during the women's liberation movement. But it happened before the official progressive movement really started. And during that movement, women got the right to vote. They got the right to their husbands, if they were married, sometimes the husbands took took ownership of all their properties they had, and it was really terrible. Some things that happened to women. But when the second wave of it came, of the feminist movement came, these women didn't call themselves. It wasn't the women's liberation movement. It was called the feminist movement, and these women demanded some different things from society. So they feminized the educational system, and girls are doing a lot better than boys are. And see, progressives, they push that. If conservatives had had more influence, then they wouldn't have pushed that, I don't think. We would have had a more traditional type of educational system where boys and girls did good, or boys did better. But women are doing a lot better, and so there are a lot more women with advanced degrees now. And so the ratio of men to women with those advanced degrees is a lot higher for black women. It's higher for black women than it is for black men. I mean, women are doing a lot better across the board in all races and ethnic backgrounds. But for black women, compared with black men, they're doing a lot better. And so you have these households in these pockets in the black community that are really bad where nobody went there. With businesses, black people didn't go there with business, they left. Some of those places are still there today, and they have boarded up houses, and they have vacant lots, and they have a lot of crime and a lot of shootings, and some of them still have drug dealers, and they still have the gangs, and you see the gang graffiti wrote on some of the walls, but these are just little pockets in the black community. It's not everywhere. It's these little pockets in the black community, and so these people, they move out, and they move when there's no opportunity. They move to other parts of the country, to other places where there are more black people at. And so they have to move. They don't move to white neighborhoods. They didn't move to white neighborhoods and Hispanic ones because they stood out too much. So they went to places where the people were more like them. And in these places, never really had any crime or break-ins before, and all of a sudden they start having more of them. And then their neighborhoods get bad. And so you have all these neighborhoods that are gerrymandered, and you have like one politician that is the representative for it. And the representative is black in a lot of cases. And the neighborhoods are really bad, and they don't get any better. Well, a lot of those politicians, they were some of the forerunners of some of the politicians that were around during the 1960s when Martin Luther King was around, and we didn't have a lot of politicians. But now we got a lot more politicians, and all of them are Democrats. Just about all of them are Democrats. And that's how progressives and the left get a lot of their work done politically through the Democrat Party. And so you have a lot of these Democrat politicians in these big cities, and you have the black neighborhoods that don't have any businesses or that are really bad in these little pockets that are really bad, and progressive policies. One thing that the progressive policies did is they gave women, it made it easier for women to acquire benefits from the government, like Section 8 housing and like SSI and food stamps and WIC. If you're a single mother, they lobbied on Congress and they made it a lot easier for single moms to get all these benefits, but not single dads. And what that did was the black community in these little pockets where there was nothing, it was incentive for the women to get all these government benefits. And they add another little kicker to it that if you make a certain amount of money on any job, you don't get any benefits. None of them. So it gave them incentive not to work. It really didn't give these women incentive to work. And in these places, the schools aren't good because the schools are funded. And some of these schools get plenty of money, but they're really not good schools. They don't have good education. And some of the administrators, with one school, there was one district, Detroit, for 1 year, for a few years between 2000 and 2015, they had the absolute worst scores in math and reading and science of any of the large metropolitan areas, of any of the big cities. Detroit did. And they sent, and it was it 88% black, or it was 92% black. And you see the people on the board of education there, they had long meet, everybody's black. And they got Democrat politicians and progressives. They funded something, what No Child Left Behind, that's what it was. No Child Left Behind in Common Core. Well, the black kids in those places, they don't have a choice but to go to the public schools because their parents can't afford to take them to private schools. And the suburban schools where the white kids are at, the tax base is there because they have a business community. So they can demand some better schools and some better education for their kids. The black kids in these inner cities, in these little pockets, anywhere from 50 to 70% of the kids are being raised by their mom. There's no father. See, that's another thing that happened with the feminist movement. It took a lot of the fathers out of the home, and that was a progressive thing. So the way they did integration in the feminist movement was really not good for the black community. And there was some other thing. Oh, W.E.B. Du Bois. W.E.B. Du Bois, a lot of people don't know this, but he was a socialist. He was a member of the Socialist Party of America. A lot of people don't know that. And so when the NAACP was formed by all these progressive whites that left black people dependent and not able to form those communities and really produce on their own, they needed a face to the NAACP. So W.E.B. Du Bois was one of their faces to the NAACP, because you see the first 3 presidents to the NAACP were white. All of them were white, and I think all of them were socialists. So you see, they had their interest in the black community. That doesn't mean they were any less racist.
No, that's
Some
true.
progressives were very See, that doesn't mean they were any less racist at all, because you see, some of the progressives were racist too. They were really racist. And so what happened was, when the NAACP was formed, the first 3 presidents, there were 60 people present. 53 were white. And apparently some more of them were sympathizers with the cause for socialists. We don't know how many sympathizers there were, but some were sympathizers. There were only 7 black people, and W.E.B. Du Bois was one of them. He was their main guy, and he was a socialist. So you see, the NAACP, the whole idea for it was designed by a white socialist. The rumor was that, and I found this as an article in the E-Groves, it was from Mississippi State, from the University of Mississippi, and it was from 1956. They submitted this article to a Georgia congressman in 1956. He read it at a session of Congress in Georgia, in the state of Georgia in 1956. It was from a Guild of Concerned Citizens in Winona, Mississippi in 1956. They claimed that the NAACP, even though it had its pros and cons for black people, was starting trouble in the United States, and they don't really have the Negro's best interest at heart. It's what these whites from Mississippi said. And they claimed that the man that founded the NAACP was a socialist, and he was trained by Russian revolutionary communists. That's what they claim in the article. And so the people that set the NAACP up, they had their interests. You see what I mean? They had their interests to cause trouble. And they claim that those same people, because this man, he was a descendant of Kentucky plantation owners that started the NAACP.
Right.
Yeah, that's what they claimed. He was a descendant of Kentucky plantation owners, and they've claimed that the same people, that the same socialists and the same communists that were behind the NAACP were some of the same people that fomented the strife that started the Civil War, because they wanted to start the Civil War to destroy the United States, because it was a capitalistic country. It had Judeo-Christian values, and it had Judeo-Christian values, and it had a capitalistic system, and it was a really successful country. And they claim that the communists and the Marxists hated that, and so they set the NAACP. They think they set the NAACP up so that they could use it to use racism to make the United States look bad, and march through all its institutions and destroy the United States. Is what they think.
So let me get that right. So they what people were saying was,
Yeah, that was what was in the article.
yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So in the article, these people were saying that basically what it was is the Soviet Union, who were trying to foment trouble, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
and use the NAACP, wasn't it? The NAACP's membership as their kind of army
Yeah,
for
to
trouble,
agitate,
to agitate. Exactly.
to
Okay.
agitate,
Yeah.
and put divisions between people, black and white. And then once you put the divisions in there, then a divided house can't stand. When you put divisions in, and the socialists and the Marxists and the communists, all of them under one umbrella now. The left, they're under the progressive left now. But conservatives, I think if conservatives had more influence over the past 40 or 50 years, then a lot of this wouldn't have happened.
Mm.
I don't think a lot of this would have happened because certain things they would not have allowed, like Common Core, the educational system, where you just pass. If a kid doesn't do good in one grade, you pass them to the next grade. Well, that's not good when they graduate from high school. If they're reading on the seventh grade level and they're doing mathematics on the sixth grade level, they're not going to be able to get into college. And what that does is it waters down, it makes it so that we don't have people that are bright enough anymore to make all the technological advances that the United States made before, and especially in the black community.
Yeah.
It made it hard. And those same people are behind some other things like DEI. It's not always good to hire somebody because they're a certain race. You hire people because they're qualified.
Right.
But if you put people in places just because they're a particular race or a particular color or religion, but they're not good enough you're going to have inferior products and inferior services. And that's bad for the United States.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that, because of course this is one of the things, isn't it, where your recent election in the States,
Yeah.
you're going to come on to that, are you? So I won't preempt what you're going to say.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, well, continue then. I won't ask my question.
Okay.
Come on.
Yeah. President Trump he was elected. He went to office. He was elected in November. He goes into office in January. And he's doing all these.
Always wait, don't worry.
Yeah. And so what he's doing is he's putting all these sanctions on other countries, tariffs. He's putting tariffs on a lot of other countries, and progressives hate it. They hate it because they want a global world. And so they want the United States to be just like everybody else. But just because you have a global world doesn't mean that it's going to be any better.
Yeah, that's true.
Because who's going to be your prime minister of a global world? And who's going to be the leadership in the global world? Are they going to be any better than if you have a national than if you have nations? You see?
And that's an interesting point,
Mm-hmm.
actually. But of course, there's the argument going on at the moment about the tariffs, as you say. From a lot of people's, from one standpoint, it
Mm-hmm.
makes a lot of sense because it's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what President Trump said he was going to
Mm-hmm.
do.
Yeah. Yeah.
In helping the economy, helping people,
Mm-hmm.
to have jobs, buy American
Mm-hmm.
goods, and things like that. And then
Mm-hmm.
away from America,
Mm-hmm.
people are, as you say, complaining and upset because it's going to affect their economies. But without going into a big American politics sort of podcast right now, I guess,
Yeah.
all of these things, this is fascinating stuff because all of these things, I'd never really considered how they all kind of mesh together.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm listening to you and thinking, this
Mm-hmm.
is great. So please
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah. See, in the book, I put some other things in there. I went over the feminist movement and black leadership and about how the NAACP, what they did was really a forerunner for black leadership. So we got a lot of people that came out of the civil rights movement. But is it a coincidence that the NAACP has been around for this many years and it had its pros and cons, but the black community still has a lot of problems, a
Right.
lot of them. Was that a coincidence? No, I think that was by design because progressives didn't intend for all the problems to be solved. They never intended for that to happen. In fact, Mar- Margaret Sanger, I want to admit, she was a feminist, and she went to Germany because she invented the abortion clinic, Planned Parenthood. There's
Okay.
been a lot of talk about her in a negative way, but progressives say it was really a great thing what she did. But she went to Germany and she talked to some of Adolf Hitler's ministers of racial hygiene, but it was in the 1950s, and some of them were still alive in the 1940s because the Holocaust ended in the 1940s.
Sure.
I think it was 1940 when they liberated the last camps in Germany. Well, anyway, she went to the 1950s and she wanted to know what they did to get rid of so many Jews. And she wanted to know what they did to exterminate so many Jews from the picture. And she listened to them and she praised their programs. And she wanted to implement them on African Americans because of the high fertility of the race and
Right.
because she believed that we needed to weed our garden and some undesirables can't stay in the garden. And she checked a lot of the boxes of a progressive. She was a feminist, she was a radical feminist, she was a Marxist, she was a socialist, she was very liberal. I mean, she checked a lot of the boxes. And look at what she did. Planned
Yeah. Wow.
Parenthood. And because of abortion, just that one thing came out of the radical feminist movement that was supported by progressives and the left. Just that one thing. Abortions, they say the country has had over 60 million of since Roe versus Wade in 1973. And so that's kind of why President Trump overturned it and let the states decide whether they were going to have abortion or not. And some states don't have it
Yeah.
anymore. Well, anyway, what happened was since then, black people have only been about 12% of the population, but we've been a third of all the abortions. So that means half of all the babies, the black babies that have ever been conceived, have all been aborted. Half.
Wow.
That takes a big chunk out of a population group. So black people are a smaller group, a much smaller group than we would have been had there not been abortion. And a lot of people are going to say, well, why do you blame progressives? Margaret Sanger She was just one progressive. No, but the radical feminists, they largely approve of abortion. And a lot of them support it. They want it.
Mm.
And that one policy just got rid of a lot of black people, and it was a progressive policy.
And you think that was intentional?
Yeah, I really do. At least from Margaret Sanger's viewpoint, and nobody else really stopped it. I think it was intentional. I think it was. And that was a progressive thing. It progressively eliminated a lot of black people from society. And integration, the way it was done, because you see, the NAACP, they didn't help put that strong business community together for black people in all these cities. They've talked about black people having businesses, but they didn't really do it like W.E.B. Du Bois did it. They didn't really do it like Booker T. Washington did it. See, he did in the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and those black people generated wealth. The NAACP hasn't really gotten anything together like that for the black community, and I think that was by design because they got progressives bagging them up.
Right.
They got progressives like the same white leadership, even though they're not there, even though the leaders, the president and everything is black now, and they have been for the past 30 or 40 years. Where's your funding coming from? Where's your money coming from?
Mm.
Who is going to court for you? These cases in court for discrimination, all of them are white. If all of them are white progressives, you're dependent on them.
Mm.
And they're going to do what they want. And it was never really to fix the problems the black community had. It fixed some, but a lot more of them have been created.
Right.
And I think that was by design.
Okay, which is interesting. So you're talking about, control and coerciveness, but really in a sort of behind the scenes kind of way,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
to put it
yeah.
in a simple term. Okay, all right.
Yeah,
I've got
I
some
think,
questions that
okay,
again, as I've said, Brian, this is fascinating.
okay,
But we're running out of time, so let me
okay.
ask you some questions, and we can go to this. So basically, we were talking about the election a few minutes ago.
Mhm.
So do you think that the loyalty of black voters to one political party, who I won't mention, has created blind spots when it comes to accountability, for instance?
Yeah, I think with loyalty to one party, the party that we've been loyal, that a lot of black people have been loyal to, is the Democrat Party. And that party is the one that progressives basically support to get everything done that they want to get done. And black people used to vote as Republicans
Right.
years ago.
Mm.
Yeah, right after the Civil War, black people were allowed to vote, but they seldom ever did because they had poll taxes and black people couldn't afford the poll taxes. The Klan used to run black people away from the polls in the South. And up north in the Midwest, they put the polls in places black people. A lot of times, you don't want to go to that place if the whites are that racist. So they rarely ever voted. So I think, I think there's been a paradigm shift for black people to vote one way. But black people have really conservative values too.
Mm.
And the conservative party now is the Republican Party. See, it used to be the Democrat Party, and
Okay.
and the Progressive Party was the Republican Party, but now the Conservative Party is the Republican Party, and the
Interesting.
progressive left-leaning party they're all Democrats now.
Yeah.
All of them are Democrats. So I think it's better if black people consider changing their political affiliations to somebody that's more conservative, because black people really have conservative values like a lot of other people do.
Right.
Hmm.
Well, that was evident in the
Yeah.
election, wasn't it?
Hmm.
Which I think was probably a bit of a shock for the progressives, as you say.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember watching the footage and reporting on it, and thinking, not thinking, but listening to some of
Hmm.
the pundits and how
Hmm.
shocked they were.
Yeah.
Because they counted on the black vote to be able to
Yes.
win.
Exactly. See, when President Obama ran, 97% of black people voted for him, for President Obama. The first time, and 93% the second time. Not this time. Only 70% of black people voted as Democrats, 70 or 75. All the rest, just about all the rest voted as Republican because the Democrats weren't delivering. They just weren't doing that. And I think that shocked some progressives. I think maybe it made some of them angry.
I think it did.
But
Watching the
yeah,
footage, yeah.
yeah, because there was one scene on TV where former President Obama, he went to talk to a group of black people, men in a barbershop, and he was disappointed because they didn't vote Democrat. And so some black people got on YouTube and they got on Facebook. Well, this man, who is he? He can't be telling us who to vote for. And they got kind of yeah, so the black community's changed now. And I think they're going to change more and more.
Become
Especially
more conservative, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if they see people like me and Larry Elder. I like watching him sometimes. Larry Elder and Diamonds and Silk. They used to come on TV. Yeah. If they start looking at more people like us, they're going to change, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, see, that brings me on to, I wanted to ask you about
Mm-hmm.
mentors, all right? And, you know, was there a specific sort of book or mentor that's helped you, or a piece of, I don't know, specific information that shook your worldview at some stage and caused you to reevaluate what you thought politically? Because, you know, maybe you were a progressive at some stage and then
Mm-hmm.
you switched over. Was there something that made that happen?
You know what? Whenever I voted for years, for a long time, for a while, from 18 to a certain, I always voted Democrat.
Oh,
I mean,
right.
I voted a straight Democrat ticket because I always thought the Democrats were right. But then I went and did some research on them, and I found out they weren't. And it's still controversial in the black community now. If you vote Republican, a lot of times you don't tell people, but you do it. But that's changing. That's starting to change now in the black community. More people are starting to go Republican. But yeah, I had a time where I voted all Democrat because I did research and I found out some really good things that the Republican Party did for us because they approved the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment of the Constitution. And Abraham Lincoln, he was a Republican. That was almost all done by Republicans. And the Democrats were mad because we weren't going to stay slaves anymore. And Andrew Jackson was a Democrat. We were supposed to get 40 acres and a mule. That was promised by Abraham Lincoln. That was what he wanted to do. Andrew Jackson, white Southerner, Democrat, he vetoes the legislation.
There's a question, isn't there? Yeah,
Yeah, and
okay,
under
yeah.
him, they started with the vagrancy laws. And a lot of blacks got arrested in the South and put in work brigades because they were walking around, wandering around. There was no place for them to go. Well, it was right after the Civil War. They had no community to go to. They had nothing. See, the president was a Democrat when that started to happen. And a lot of black people got arrested for crimes that honestly they didn't commit. They were just made up ones. Now, some of them may have been, but they were not, they were exaggerated ones.
Yeah.
But a lot of them, they didn't commit them. And they put them in those work brigades and they made them work. But see, Andrew Jackson, he was a Democrat.
I mean, again, interesting, isn't it? So
Uh-huh.
trying to manipulate
Mm-hmm.
the whole community.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So let's move towards wrapping this up.
Okay.
If that's okay, Brian, because I'm
Yeah.
not because I'm not interested, but because you know people are listening and they're
Yeah.
going to be enthralled as well.
Yeah.
But so have your views evolved at all since writing the book? You know, or have recent events such as the election, I guess, reinforced your views in terms of you know how these things are working in the States?
Well, you know what? I learned some different things. Even me, after writing the book, I learned some different things that I didn't know about. And from what's happened from this last election in the States, this election, it just reinforced what I said, that Black people are really conservative. We really have conservative values, and so a lot more of us are voting as Republicans now. And I think, yeah, this just the experience of writing the book and me learning, because I learned like the article on the NAACP. I didn't know about the article till I was just about through with the book,
Amazing.
and I found it online. And it was
That must
written
have
in
been
1956. Changed me about the NAACP. It hit me like, whoa, are you the NAACP? That changed me about the NAACP.
yeah. That is
And
amazing. I can
yeah,
see how
it
that
changed.
would.
And see, the NAACP was a icon of direction for Black leadership. It changed a lot. And then I'm saying, well, no wonder. It's like that changed me.
Yeah, and it's like the cogs coming together, isn't it? Right. So okay, so that's interesting because so what are you saying the responsibility is for, say, Black intellectuals and public voices? You know, what responsibility do they have when it comes to telling the truth about what's working and what isn't working in their communities? I mean, you know, if we're talking about progressives rather manipulating a particular situation, how are intellectuals supposed to combat that, or should they?
But you know what? A lot of the intellectuals in our community are in a lot of the white universities. And if they're college professors, or if they're with a corporation or with a firm and they want to keep their jobs, they're going to be quiet. They're going to be hush hush.
Yeah.
If the organization that they work for is a progressive organization, they're not going to stand up. They're going to speak out a lot. But some of them get radical,
Mm.
like Candace Owen. I don't know if you heard of her before.
No, no.
Okay, Candace Owen and Larry Elder. Some of them do, and some actors and actresses, and they've just stepped outside the mold, and they didn't care if they got rejected. And every time they do, they expose something.
Right.
And sometimes those things can't be reversed. They've been exposed. So I think eventually more is going to get exposed. And this hasn't just happened with Black people and progressivism. It's happened with white people, Hispanic people. They're catching on to this leftism and progressivism. Is not what we thought it was.
Yeah,
And
interesting. So,
yeah.
so it's about, well, you know, people say that it's about people clinging onto power.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, and so I think that's what you're saying as well. So, how then do we move on and talk about these tough issues of family structure, education, entrepreneurship
Mm-hmm.
without falling? This is the important part. Without falling into culture war traps. I think this is the problem, isn't it? Where you've got the two sides fighting against each other, you know, the ideologies, as you said, about socialism and things. But so, how can that be discussed in a safe kind of way, or in a positive way, maybe?
You know, it's really kind of hard to discuss that in a positive way because some people now are choosing between their jobs and between their political affiliations and between their social clubs that they're in. They don't want to offend anybody. They're choosing now between those, and the people that have stepped out and become bold and decided this is wrong, those people have really made a difference. So some people are just going to have to, people just going to have to step out and change and become bold. And in the Black community, one thing that's really happened now is marriages in the family. We're not having marriages and families like the rest of the community. And I think the leaders that can straighten that out are the pastors in some of the churches.
Sure.
See, they can talk about it from a moral standpoint, about how immoral it is to raise children like that, for them to be raised. Well, it's not immoral for them to be raised as a single mom, but the way that it was intended for it to happen is in the context of marriage with a mother and a father, and not a bunch of kids born out of wedlock because you were shacking and packing with somebody, you had a relationship with them, and you didn't want to stay with them, or you had a one night stand with somebody. That's not biblical, and it's not moral. See, the pastors can address it morally. See, that's where leaders, and the pastors still mean a lot in the black community, and some of the pastors are, but some of them aren't, because a lot of the congregations are women, single moms with kids, and they don't want to offend their congregations. But some of the pastors are,
Of
though.
course. Yeah, that's a
And
good
that's
point. I
one
mean,
place where it can start in the black community, because the church is big in the black community. Those pastors can really do a lot. But the only thing is people aren't attending church like they used to anymore.
there's that as well. That's not
Yeah,
helping, is it?
yeah, they're not.
No, no. And of course, okay, so if, say, you were to design a new political movement for Black
Hmm.
America, right?
Hmm.
What core values, and I think I know the answer to this, what core values would be at the foundation of that political party if you were to do that?
We need to have families. We need to have more families with a mother and a father, and the children being raised by a loving mother and father. It doesn't have to be a biological mother and father. Preferably, it should be, but it doesn't have to be, as long as they're raised by a mother and a father, because the mothers and fathers have different parenting roles, and it'll raise a complete kid. Now, that doesn't mean that kids that are raised by single parents aren't good kids always. Then some kids are raised by a mom and a father, a mom and a dad. They can be monsters too. But kids generally do better if they have a loving mother and father. I think that's the first thing I do. The second thing is have the pastors, the ones that are going to really stand out morally and use their biblical values and say what should be and what shouldn't be in society morally.
Hmm.
And second and third, we need to have a community that has an economy with businesses, kind of like the Hispanics did with the little village neighborhood in Chicago, and like those people did in the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's what needs to happen in the black community, and keep some money in your circle so you can develop wealth, and so you can develop some jobs and some opportunity and really influence things with your biblical worldview.
Yeah, right, right. What
See,
did you say? Sorry to interrupt, but talking about Greenwood there,
yeah,
what was that figure again about the how many times the money stayed in the community because of the entrepreneurship?
the article that I got was between 36 and sometimes 100 times. A dollar never left the community.
Yeah. That really did that yeah, that his
Hmm.
when I learned about that, I thought, how obviously how sad,
Hmm.
clearly,
Hmm.
but how good it was. And as you said, this is what it's about though, isn't it? It's
Hmm.
not about relying on other people providing it work for that
Hmm.
community.
Hmm.
It's about the community doing it themselves. And that's interesting
Themselves.
because you've also got the question, of course, that I know that over here in the UK,
Hmm.
people are concerned about community groups grouping together,
Yeah.
and so they're not that happy about it, to be fair. And but then, having said that, they're not. Some of these people aren't happy about their all these community groups turning into diaspora and sort
Hmm.
of just being existing within everything. If you see what I mean. So that's interesting. So
See,
thank you.
yeah,
For,
and see the left, they are about the government controlling everything. But see, but people can get together and make a lot happen. And they don't have to be ethnic communities either.
that's
They
true.
don't
It's
have to
obviously
be, they don't have to be. But we have still got an ethnic division in the United States. And it's not one that people like to talk about a lot, but we still do. And I was saying if we were going to have it, then the black community, if we're going to exist like that, and Hispanics kept these little places where they could produce a lot of opportunity for them, then black people, what's wrong with us doing it for us?
yeah, well, it seems like a no-brainer, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. But on the other hand, if everybody's going to do that, We need to have this other big part of America where people can get along and make America work. And one example of that, I said, was the military. You can't have separate black, white, and Hispanic and Asian regiments of the military. It's not going to work. You can't do that. And there are certain other places like government, and maybe some because the government, everybody benefits from the government and from the military. And maybe some institutions like factories where they make cars at, just as an example, everybody benefits from cars. So, you don't need to have a black factory and a white factory,
No,
an
right, right.
Asian factory and a Hispanic factory. You don't need that. Everybody benefits from cars, or maybe like where they make airplanes, Boeing.
Yeah, right.
Everybody benefits from planes.
Yeah, yeah.
So we
So,
can have a fully integrated workforce there with no problems. If that's the way we're going to have it, if we're going to have these separate communities, and you can't get people to break them up, that's probably the best way to do it.
yeah, well, through
Yeah,
employment, right? I see what you
employment.
mean. So this,
Unless everybody decides they want to change and make the country a different America, we can be completely integrated. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem either way.
yeah,
I'm fine.
as long as
Hmm.
there's actually, so I hate to use the word freedom, you know what I mean, but as long as there's the way that people can actually govern themselves, right, as opposed to being governed, right?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
okay, so how would you reach the younger generations then that have been raised on these progressive ideals? I think that's a real question that has to be sorted now. I mean, is it about messaging? Is it about, I don't know, education maybe? Or is it something deeper, do you think?
You know what? A lot of the kids now have been educated. They're gonna have to be re-educated a lot different now, because in the schools they're educating them to hate the country, because it's a free market economy with capitalism, hate our Judeo-Christian values. But the United States is a great country. It's contributed a lot to the world. And they're trying to say the United States has invented slavery. Isn't that ridiculous? The
Yeah,
United States invented slavery, and there's all kinds of bad things about the United States. And I admit the United States has got some bad things about it, and slavery was one of them. But the United States has got some good things about it too that people can be proud of. We
yeah,
need to get those things in the forefront and let people know, hey, there are a lot of things we can be proud of in the United States too. We invented a lot of inventions came from the United States too. And a lot of good things came from the United States. So let's be proud to just be Americans. So now we got to re-educate kids all over again about the positive aspects of being American. And they've went so far down this rabbit hole of what's bad about the United States. We got to reverse that. It's going to take, and it's not going to happen overnight.
right.
It's going to take a long time for it to happen.
Interesting. So it's not. There's quite a few countries that happens in. This country, for instance, also
England, oh
uh,
yeah, I heard about it,
in
what's
the
happening in
UK.
the UK.
Yeah, yeah. So people argue about that as well, which
Hmm.
is quite interesting.
Hmm.
So okay, so let's start to wrap things up, Brian. Just one last question though. In terms of culture, I think this is the point, right? In music, okay, so hip hop or any media or pop culture, there's often, I guess, so I understand, a political influence within
Hmm.
those genres.
Yeah.
Have you witnessed any sort of shift in those spaces that points to, I don't know, changing political tide?
Hmm. You know what? It really depends on the artist. Some artists have decided they don't want to be a part of this progressive left, and Hollywood. Hollywood is real big in influencing people. What happened with them is if they don't support a certain agenda, like maybe the LGBTQ agenda, they get blacklisted. But some of the actors and actresses didn't care. And they've been on conservative talk shows, and they've done some other things like podcasts that were really good, and they reach people like that. Hip hop is really a good way and music is really a good way to influence the youth. But again, the music industry has got so many progressive tentacles in them the musicians are afraid to express anything else too, just like Hollywood. The actors and actresses are. But again, some of the musicians in all genres, pop, hip hop, rap, rock, they broke the mold and did things on their own. And when they do, things slowly start to change in an area. They're revealing things to everybody that were bad about progressivism that they didn't know about. And so they're starting to slowly change things, and progressives don't like it. But
Interesting. We just think again, so it's an important medium then,
mhm.
right? So, okay, all right. Talking of that, here's our final question. What's one message that you'd like to share with a black student, a young black student, I think, who's feeling disillusioned or politically disengaged? What would you say to them for the future?
That one is what it took me a while to think about. It's going to take me a while. Okay, for the future, I would tell them, don't give up hope. Don't. This is not all an end all thing. I would say you have conservative values, you have conservative morals, and you want to do conservative things and you want to do good things in life. So vote conservative candidates into office that are going to get you to where you want to be as a conservative. Vote those people into office, and when you get in society, certain things that other people, are going to be participating in, if they don't represent your conservative values, then you break the mold and say, I'm not doing this. And you go independent and find some people like you, and you start your own institutions that are different. Because I remember we got a talk show host here in the United States. He's a conservative talk show host. He's saying that we got President Trump as a president, and that's great. But people need to start doing things locally. I was watching him on the Jesse Kelly show. He was saying people need to see things get involved in politics locally and
Very
start
true.
affecting your city and your state and your council members, and you need to start affecting state politics and city politics. And I'm saying your ward members and your city council members, and maybe just something else more local. Your school board members, the heads of school, sit down and talk to them and say this is not the way it should be. Because he's in Texas now, and he was saying that just about everybody at the school board meetings, even though Texas is a red state, the governor is a Republican, the president is Republican. You go to some of the meetings, the school board meetings, and everybody's a Democrat. And a lot of them are radical Democrats. That's where you can start with
That's true.
people. Just get people together locally and start some different organizations, some different committees that are independent of the progressive ones, and go door to door and talk to other people and be reasonable with them. Does this make sense? Does this make sense? And you can get a lot of things changed locally doing that and with local politics.
Well,
That's
absolutely.
what I
Yeah, I
would
think
tell them.
that's the thing, isn't it? Local laws and things. Okay, so Brian, thank you. I mean, is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you'd like to that you'd like to mention about your book? How long it's been out, whether you've got anything else that's coming up quickly in terms of the book or anything?
I don't really plan on writing another book. I didn't really plan on writing because I didn't really plan on writing this one.
It just
But
happened.
yeah, it just did.
Yeah.
But um, no, I didn't really plan on writing any more books. And I don't really have anything to say about the book anymore that's brief. Because I wrote about the Black Power movement and a lot of other things in the book. And so, yeah, they would be lengthy.
Yeah,
So,
no, exactly.
yeah.
Okay, no, fine. That's full stop. Period.
hmm
Right. Okay, that's that.
hmm
Great, fascinating stuff. Well, listen,
hmm
Brian. thank you for joining us and sharing your
Sure.
perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say that your insights are bold, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
challenging and
Mm-hmm.
timely as well because of the election and
Yeah.
everything else. And it's pretty clear that this upcoming book is going to spark some much needed conversation. I'm going to be keeping an eye on you and seeing what happens, I think, and hopefully.
It's really going to be controversial.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look forward to talking to you again in the future. So, for everyone listening, keep an eye out for Progressives, Leftists, and Black America as it makes its return in this updated edition. And I think that's the point, it's updated
Mm-hmm.
now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we'll be sure to share more once it's available. So, Brian Oglesby, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And thanks again for being here. And to our listeners, well, stay sharp and stay curious as usual, and we'll see you